and welcome to Exporting with Confidence. Our speakers today will be Tim Birmingham. Tim is the Director of Quality Assurance and Industry Services for the Almond Board of California. He provides direction and oversight for all food quality and safety research activities, industry programs, industry education, and compliance. He also works as part of the U.S. delegation at the UN Economic Commission for Europe Working Party on Ag Quality Standards. His professional career includes 30 years of experience in food processing, quality, process validation, food safety, microbiology, and regulatory affairs. Tim is also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and he served in Operation Desert Storm. Our other speaker today is Abhi Kulkarni. He is part of the Global Technical and Regulatory Affairs Department at the Almond Board. He monitors various regulatory and trade issues that can impact the industry and helps the industry stay abreast of any changes. My name is Anthony Sagariballa. I will be your moderator today. I am from the Almond Company, where I serve as the Director of Operations. Today's session will overview what it takes to export goods to various markets across the world, as well as bringing them back with us. With that, let's get started.
Thank you, Anthony, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you could join us. So let's get started. So quick announcement, this QR code, if you have any questions throughout the session, you can scan that QR code and input your questions, and we will get to it at the end of the session. And then we'll also have a QR code towards the end, so in case you miss now. Right, so what our goal for today's session was to give an idea of what are some of the considerations for when you decide you want to start exporting California almonds to somewhere in the world. So by show of hands, how many of you are already involved in exporting almonds somewhere around the world? Quite a few, okay. And so then for you who are veterans of the industry, maybe some of this information may be a little bit basic, but for those of you who are new or considering branching out to different markets, we hope that this will be a little bit valuable information in terms of what are some of the considerations when you look at different markets. And so here on the screen, you see this chart which kind of shows where California almonds go. So directly and indirectly, we reach almost 100 countries around the world. Each country has its own different regulations, and that's why it's important to kind of know where you're going and what the requirements of that market are. And that's what we'll discuss now. A quick putting that flow into a little bit of numbers. So for the crop year 24-25, we exported 1.975, almost 2 billion pounds of California almonds all over the world. That's roughly 45,000 20-ton containers. That's a lot of containers. And then you can consider it law of probability, Murphy's law, or whatever you want to call it. Within those 20,000 containers, you're going to have some rejections. And so our goal with this presentation will be help you minimize the risk of that happening to your shipment. So let's start with what is a rejection. So basically, it is when a consignment goes to a foreign market and it is denied entry for any number of reasons. It could be regulatory reasons, so let's say exceeding aflatoxin or pesticide limits. It could be lack of phytosanitary certificate. It could be lack of customs document or following registration process. It would be any reason. And then there's different options that I will get into later in the presentation of what happens to those rejected shipments. A lot of times, if all options fail, the only option remains bringing it back. And Tim is going to cover that in the second half of the presentation, because bringing a rejected shipment from anywhere in the world back to California is a process in itself. And so Tim is going to cover that. So let's start with like some of the basics. So you've decided you've got some leads and you want to tap into a new export market. What are some of the things you want to consider? So preparation is the very key in trying to understand the market you are going to be shipping to. So what is the importing country? Has any specific requirements? Is there any phytosanitary requirements? Is there any registration requirements? So as you can see on the screen, there's a few examples I put in. So certain countries around the world have a requirement that your shipment has to have a phytosanitary certificate. For example, Japan, Korea, Morocco, and these are just three of the few. Some countries mandate that the exporter has to be registered in their database. And so China and Turkey has those kind of registrations. And certain countries have specific labeling requirements that must accompany the shipment. So for example, India has a requirement on declaring the status of the shipment, whether it's vegetarian or not vegetarian, certain logo requirements. And then finally, there's also the plethora of shipping documents that the right documents need to accompany the shipment. So let's start with phytosanitary certificates. So a lot of the countries around the world, as I mentioned, there's different phytosanitary requirement based on their own import conditions. And one of the best sources for finding out what those requirements are the USDA, what they call PCIT system, phytosanitary certificate issuance and trading system. And as you can see, there's on the main landing screen, there's at the drop-down menu towards the bottom where it shows country. And I'm just going to give an example starting with Korea. So let's say we want to ship to Korea. And as you can see, it says, okay, that's the country. What commodity are you want to export? So we go in that box and type in the botanical name for almonds. If you just type almonds, it will give you an error message. So you have to type Prunus dulcis, which is the botanical name for almonds. Once you type that, it will give you different options within the almonds of, are you shipping in shell? Are you shipping shelled? Are you shipping hulls? For this example, let's say we want to ship shelled nuts. Once you do that, it will give you the whole requirements. Now, ignore the first top part because that's a very general summary for Korea that most of it doesn't apply to almonds. But if you look towards the bottom under the Prunus dulcis label, it will show for shelled nut, and then where the arrow is showing you, it says phytosanitary certificate is required. So now you know for any given market where you go, Korea, okay, you need to have a phytosanitary certificate before you ship it. Let's take another example here, European Union. So if you go through the same process, from the drop-down menu, you choose European country, put Prunus dulcis, and then say, okay, we want to ship shelled nuts to Europe. Now, this time, the result is different. It says commodities unrestricted, which means you do not need a phytosanitary certificate for shipping to Europe. And then a third, but slightly different example. Let's take India, our biggest export market. So India is a big market for in-shell. So this time, instead of shelled, we pick in-shell. And then it shows you exactly what is needed. So not only do you need a phytosanitary, but there's specific parameters for fumigation that you have to follow. For India, there's using either methyl bromide or phosphine. So all of this information is available there, and for all the other export countries. So that's a great resource. And typically, the interested party that will do the phytosanitary inspections for you is your local county ag commissioner. So if you reach out to them and ask if you have any other questions about, hey, I'm planning to ship to India, what do I need to do in terms of getting phytosanitary, they will guide you through the process. Registration requirements, so another thing. So as I mentioned, some of the countries around the world, they have specific registration requirements for an exporter. So they will say, this is our database. You as an exporter need to go in, provide all your information, certain type of documents, and then you'll be registered, and then that registration number will accompany your shipping documents. So here I give example two prominent with China through his Decree 248, which came about 2 or 3 years ago now already. It's a mandatory to have that registration and have specific codes that you have to input. And once you have that registration, only then you can ship to China. Similarly, Turkey of recent has also started a similar registration process. You have to first go through the registration process, then whatever printout is generated, you have to take it to your Chamber of Commerce, get it attested, and then you submit it to the system to get it approved, and then you're finally okay to ship to Turkey. A lot of other countries, there's more of what we call informal registration. So they have a database, but it's not mandated that you have to register yourself. Even your broker or your buyer can do it for you. And then a good source of that, and I put a screenshot, that's USDA GAIN reports. So the GAIN reports are for Global Agriculture Information Systems, I think, yeah, a network. And so the USDA publishes these reports for all major export markets and all different commodities that we export. And so you will have GAIN reports for almonds for pretty much all our major export market, and then they provide you information of what are some of the key export requirements to be aware of for that particular market. So it's a great resource if you have not tried it before. Labeling requirements. Again, certain countries have specific label requirements, and it varies a little bit by country. But by and large, the common denominator is you to have product name, name of your packer, address, country of origin. Country of origin is also very important for another reason for tariff reason, because in certain countries we have tariff agreements, so you need to put country of origin to qualify for that. Quantity, in some cases they require allergen statement, lot code, and then specific requirements. So I put an example of India I mentioned earlier. India is a very particular case. So they want to have FSSAI, which is basically Food Safety Authority of India, their logo on the label or accompanying shipping documents, as well as a declaration that the commodity is vegetarian or not vegetarian. I mean, we all know almonds are vegetarian, but India wants it on the label. And then finally, shipping documents. So the most common, of course, bill of lading, invoice in terms of what the quantities, the appropriate HS code based on whether it's in shell or shelled. Certificate of origin, I already mentioned that, very important for tariff-related reasons to get tariff relief. And then finally, electronic export information, which is mandatory for any shipment going from US abroad, not just agriculture, any shipment that is about $2,500 in value. And that's the portal where you go in terms of registering that shipment that is going to be exported. And so what all this means, now we know that given all the different information that I just discussed, you're probably going to need a good team within your organization, because some information pertains to regulations, labeling, some information pertains to customs, some information pertains to tariffs. So you need people from different functions within your organization. So, and that's why teamwork is very important here, to have good employees and training them in all these different requirements. So let's take some of the key regulatory issues that we normally see where our shipments run into problems. So two main ones are exceeding pesticide MRLs, maximum residue limits, and the other one is aflatoxin. So in terms of pesticide MRLs, the most common ones we see is DDVP, which is dichlorose, and PBO, piperonyl butoxide. So both of these are warehouse fumigants. So they don't fumigate the product itself, but you fumigate the space itself, and typically this is a post-harvest fumigant. And a lot of times these are the ones we see when any of our shipments are implicated in rejections. So this is something to make you aware that if you have a shipment coming up, to consider what day or time of the month you're doing that fumigation, to not be too close, because it might impact your shipment. And then the second one is aflatoxin, the most common we see in EU and Japan. And we'll go a little bit in depth on these ones. So for aflatoxin, there's a chart in EU for European Union, as we see in the bottom. With the exception of 2018, by and large, the industry has done a fantastic job in terms of minimizing the number of rejections. This year, in fact, we only have had 2 rejections as of last year. This is calendar year. So from January until last week, we've only had 2 rejections, which is fantastic job. So it's credit to the industry, the great job you guys are doing. And you probably also know we have a pre-export check agreement with Europe, where for doing the pre-testing, sampling, and inspection here, we qualify for less than 1% inspection upon arrival in Europe. The key thing to note, and it's at the bottom, is PEC program is voluntary. So they cannot detain your shipment for lack of PEC certificate. You can still ship to Europe without PEC certificate. And looking at the number of rejections and looking at the volume we ship to EU, the percentage is very, very low. So any given year, we ship anywhere from 14 to 15,000 containers to Europe. And you can see there's only been 2 rejections out of that. So that's a great job on part of the industry. Shipping to the other important market where we see this issue frequently is Japan. So until recently, as a few months ago, Japan was inspecting 100%. So every shipment was tested for aflatoxin. And that's why the numbers you see are a little bit higher than Europe. But as of April this year, we reached an agreement between the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, Japanese Ministry, the USDA and ABC to have sort of a pre-testing protocol now, not too dissimilar to EU, but not exactly the same, starting for April. And what that got us was going from 100% went to 5%. And because in the last 6 months, 7 months since the protocol went into effect, we have had no rejections in Japan. The Japanese ministry agreed to further reduce that from 5 to 4%. So again, it's a fantastic job on part of the industry. And now currently we are also discussing doing a reprocessing option because at the moment there is not any reprocessing option. The shipment has to come back if there's a rejection. But hopefully in the near future, we will have an option in Japan. So handlers will not have to bring the rejected shipment back. They can have some sort of reprocessing there itself and then not having to bring it back. So what are your options in case there are rejections? So it depends on country requirements, right? Also practicality, like how soon can you get the options of reprocessing or retesting or any other options? What does the customer say? Because we've seen, from my desk, I've seen all types of reactions from the customers. Some that you have long-standing relationship, they are more understanding. They say, okay, we'll work with you. We'll figure out something with the rejected shipments. Others are more hands-off. They're like, I don't want the shipments. You do whatever you want. So then it's up to you to figure out what to do with it. And then you have to figure out, okay, what's the cost of all these different options? So addressing aflatoxin issues in Europe. So reprocessing in Europe is a little bit easier than Japan because there already exists few reprocessing options in Netherlands and Spain. So typically, even if you have rejection in any member state, you're able to take your shipment there. Of course, you have to figure out the cost for treating your shipments. PEC less than 1% inspection. So as I already mentioned, lack of PEC certification is not a ground for rejection. If that does happen to your shipment, let us know. Typically, once in a while we do see that because there might be new person at the port working as not familiar with the PEC. And so we step in and usually we get the shipment released very quickly. And we're always talking with the European Commission as well as individual member state in terms of training them, reminding them what the PEC agreement is to make sure that there's less risk of rejection. And then finally, US goods return. I won't go too much because Tim is going to talk a bit more about that later. So here's a typical rejection scenario. So you've done all your homework, you have your shipment PEC certified, it's good to go, leaves the port from Oakland, arrives in Germany, it gets, unfortunately, luck of the draw, gets flagged for testing, comes higher than 10 ppb total or 8 ppb B1. Now it's getting rejected. So what happens next? So typically, what happens is the EU will issue something called a rapid alert. And what that means is they will flag that shipment, and that system is shared by all the European member states. So even if the rejection happens in Hamburg, port people in Valencia or any other European port know, okay, that particular shipment of almond had a rejection in Hamburg. So the idea is that you cannot just move it and bring it back through a different port. And so once the alert is issued, then ABC gets notified from our contacts in Brussels. And they say, hey, this shipment rejected, this is the shipment number. So then we get in contact with the appropriate, whoever the relevant shipper is. And then we said, okay, we just were notified about rejection for your shipment. What do you intend to do? Because then they will, in turn, then the shipper will talk to the customer and say, try to do either retesting, which is ideal option because that's, you'll see in the next slide in terms of cost, and also the fastest option. So Typically, Europe allows, if there is a rejection, that you can request a retest. So a rejection at the first test doesn't mean automatic rejection. We have seen several cases this year already where they retested this shipment and it came satisfactory and the shipment was released. That was it. So always we encourage handlers to ask for retest. And here's the cost. So you can see the reprocessing options between their detention and demurrage charges or trucking from wherever the detention was to the reprocessing facility, the actual cost of reconditioning, and then probably there's some loss of value of the shipments. Altogether, you're looking at least $3,000 to $5,000 just for the reprocessing option. But then if you are to bring that shipment back, that cost goes up significantly because now you're talking about the freight on top of that. And you have to deal with FDA and the cost of doing the reconditioning and everything. And so it's anywhere upward of 8,000 to 9,000 more on the lower side of estimate. It's probably more than 10,000. And so the tips for reprocessing, we always emphasize speed here. So when you are faced with a decision of what to do with rejected shipment, make the decision quickly because the longer your shipment is sitting, A is accumulating detention demurrage charges. B, the product quality might be suffering because in the middle of the summer, if the consignment is sitting in, 90 degrees with 90% humidity, that's probably not good for the shipment. So you want to make a quick decision in terms of, I want to reprocess or I want to bring it back, whatever it might be. And of course, you will talk to your buyer and see what their intentions are too. If they're okay with doing a reprocessing there, waiting a little bit longer, and whatever, so you can consult with buyer and take that decision. And to that effect, what we also try to do is because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of turnover between employees, there's new people coming in the industry overseas, we always try to emphasize what the pre-export check program is, all the different stuff the industry does in terms of quality and educating all the different stakeholders, so that to minimize this risk of detention and rejection. And to that, you can see a couple of photos there. Recently, ABC staff went to Japan to discuss further the protocol agreement that we had just reached and went into implement in April. And then we also had talks in the EU with Dutch authorities, in the Brussels, the central authority, as well as some of the European representatives in DC, just to try to emphasize and clarify all the work that the industry is doing so that they are aware and that minimizes further the risk of rejections based on lack of knowledge. And we are also planning a project, submit to grants from USDA, to bring some of the key EU port officials as well as from other countries, to bring them here, give them an idea of how things work here, so that when they go back to the respective countries, they have a much better understanding when they see an almond shipment coming from their ports. And with that, Tim, I'll hand it over to you for the second part. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Abhi. So the first part of the talk really was focused on helping to give you some options and some tools to help avoid bringing product back to the U.S. We know that's very costly, very time-consuming. You have to replace the load that you're bringing back. So obviously the goal is to not have to bring product back to the U.S. But we know that that's not 100% feasible, and that product will still have to come back to the U.S. from time to time. So today, now I'm going to focus a little bit on the steps that hopefully will help to mitigate some of the challenges related to bringing the goods back here to the U.S. So first thing you need to know is that anything that does come back to the U.S., FDA is going to treat all those goods entering the U.S. as foreign, as not of domestic origin. They're going to treat it as if it's an import coming into this country. So even though it was shipped initially from California, they're still going to treat it as an import coming back into the U.S. And so all imports, they're subject to Customs Border Protection and Food and Drug Administration scrutiny. And I know, some of you in this room who've experienced the process. Maybe you're one of the handlers that have brought one of those 23 lots back from Japan. It can feel like you're jumping through a flaming hoop. It can feel like a very tedious process that sometimes takes longer than it should. So I'm hopefully going to help you to navigate some of this and give you a little bit of good news as we move forward with that. All imported foods, it does indeed have to be pure, wholesome, safe to eat, and produced under sanitary conditions. And then, you need to submit prior notification when an import is coming into this country. So all those things have to happen with the product as it's being brought back into the U.S. So I'm really going to talk about 3 parts of the process on getting the product back. The first is, 1, get it back into the U.S. on the U.S. soil. And Abby is a great resource to help you do that. If you do have a rejection and you need to bring that product back, if you're not able to find another option such as reprocessing or an alternative market, he can help give you guidance on what are the steps you need to do to start to bring that product back. While the product is coming back, it's important to really understand what it was rejected for, what it is being brought back for. If it's aflatoxin, there are cases where it may fail a foreign aflatoxin regulatory limit, but it may still be within the U.S. regulatory limit. So the U.S., for instance, is 20 part per billion total aflatoxin. In the EU that Abby talked about, the limit for aflatoxin is 10 part per billion total, 8 part per billion B1. So if it fails at, let's say, 12 part per billion total, it's still within U.S. regulatory limits. U.S. FDA may say, you know what, it's fine, we're not going to require any reconditioning be done to that product. But if that product failed at anything above 20 part per billion or even close to 20 part per billion, very likely FDA is going to say you need to recondition that product. And even if it failed at a level less than the U.S. regulatory limit, they still could require reconditioning, but typically they don't if it's less than 20 part per billion. But that's the thing that you can start to prepare while the product is coming back, to start to prepare for a detention notice. If you think it failed at greater than 20 part per billion, you're likely going to have to develop a reconditioning plan. And that's the last part of the process, is really building out that plan and then carrying out the plan. I'm going to spend some time walking through some of those details with you. All right, so 1, notify ABC when you do have a rejection. There are cases in which the foreign port will require an official goods return letter. It seems like recently that hasn't been the case, but in Europe in the past, different ports have required this letter. And all you have to do is to reach out to the Almond Board, and Abby will prepare that letter for you that you could share with the port authorities so that then you can start to bring the goods back. Luckily, there's a lot of options in Europe, so typically that product can be reprocessed or it can go to another market. So we haven't seen product coming back from Europe here recently. At this time in Japan, the only option for failed lots is to bring that product back, and that's why Abby, he showed the data on that. Over the past 3 years, we've brought back around 80 consignments or so from Japan. Luckily, we think that there will be a reconditioning option in Japan here pretty soon. I know there's some folks from the Japan Nut Association here today. They've recently submitted a proposal to MHLW for reconditioning, and we're hopeful that that will be an option here in the spring of this next year. So the best way, if you're not familiar with bringing the product back, is to work with someone who is familiar. So your customs broker typically would be familiar with this process. You will have to submit a prior notification to FDA. That prior notification has to be no less than 8 hours before arrival. So it has to be done before it's close to being offloaded. It can't be done more than 30 days in advance. There's a couple of ways you can do it. You can do through the FDA prior notification interface system. That has to be done within 15 days of arrival. And then the other option would be through the Custom Borders Protection Automated Brokerage interface that Abby talked a little bit about, the ACE system, no more than 30 days prior to arrival. But you do need to issue that notification of import so that FDA understands that product is coming back. And anyone who's familiar with the product and the process can actually submit that on your behalf. All right, as I mentioned, as you're bringing the product back, it's time to really start to look at, do you think that product is going to be detained by FDA? And again, if it failed at anywhere close to 20 part per billion or above, it's going to likely be required by FDA that you submit a reconditioning plan and you carry out that plan. So this is the time to start to prepare, because you're going to have a limited time once FDA issues a detention notice to prepare that plan and submit it to them. So there's things that you can start to do. Use that transit time to translate documents. If it's in a foreign language, translate it to English to make it easier for FDA to understand. You can work, again, with your customs broker to help you with that. And then you can submit some of the documentation around the failed lot through the ITAX electronic system. Now, FDA is going to, once they issue a detention notice, they're going to issue this Form 766, and they're going to ask you to prepare a reconditioning plan to address the failed lot. And this little box that I'm going to highlight here, right here, that's where they want you to write your reconditioning steps. Well, you can't write a detailed plan that FDA will accept in a little box like that. It's just not possible. So you need to fill out this form, but in addition to this form, you need to prepare a very detailed plan that outlines every single step of the process for FDA to review and approve before you even begin the reconditioning. So I would, and we'll walk through what that looks like. We've got some templates to help you with that. But I would also encourage you, before you just jump in and start to do this, work with your compliance FDA officer, who you should, when they issue the detention notice, you should know who that is. Feel free to call them. If you have any questions, I think building a relationship with the compliance officer early on will help you get through this process a lot quicker. FDA is going to give you 2 chances to submit a plan and get it right. If you don't get it right after the second time, that's it. You're not going to be allowed to recondition the product. So I think building a little bit of a rapport early on with the compliance officer and not doing it by email, but actually communicating with them directly, will pay dividends in the long run. And a lot of details. So we're going to walk through what some of those details are. All right, so the detailed reconditioning plan. So we've created a guide that we think is very successful. We actually have a template as well that mirrors the guide. We've piloted the template. We know it's worked with a handful of handlers that have used this now. It's a way that the information can be presented in a uniform way that FDA, we think, is starting to become more familiar with, which will help streamline the process. And I'll show you that template here in a second. But the basic parts of the plan, the company information, so you need to describe who the company is, the contact information, the address, et cetera. Excuse me. I'm going to take a little sip of water here. You need to describe, what the product was, what it was packed in, the ship date, any testing that was done on the product here before it shipped. I think that's important. If it failed aflatoxin at 15 part per billion in Europe, but you have a certificate that you tested it here, and it was at a level less than that, that may be useful information for FDA. Aflatoxin in almonds, this is something that we think FDA is becoming more familiar with, the different processes that can be used to recondition almonds for aflatoxin, sources of aflatoxin, studies that have been done showing the efficacy of sorting for aflatoxin. This is all the background information that should go in a packet to FDA for reconditioning. And we have all this information available. It's linked to in this guideline. So you don't have to go and find this. You actually just plug in information that we've already created for you to describe how reconditioning is effective for almonds and aflatoxin. The reconditioning method, a lot of detail needs to be done on this. We're going to walk through that. And then the last part of the process is, after you go through all of this reconditioning, what are you doing to the almonds to actually check them again to verify that they're within regulatory limits? So that's the laboratory part of the process, including the sampling and the testing of the almonds. All right, so the template, and again, this is a lot here. It's hard for you to kind of see. The template can grow as you build more information in this text. It can actually get larger than it's showing right here. But these are basically the sections that I just described, but we're going to walk through some of these in a little bit more detail. Typically, by the time you filled out this template, there's some flow charts you probably have to drop in. You have to describe the people who are doing some of the processes. It could be expanded out to 4 pages or so of information. On the reconditioning method, it's really important to describe in accurate detail where the reconditioning is going to occur. who's going to be doing the reconditioning, and then the type of equipment that's going to be used for the reconditioning. You have to be very specific here. You cannot say, I'm going to run the product through my sorting equipment to remove insect damage almonds. That's not going to pass FDA scrutiny. They're going to want to see when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, how you're going to measure the quality of the product before and after, how you're going to measure the insect damage that you're pulling out. They want all of this detail to be spelled out into your plan. And then, very importantly, if they approve your plan, you need to make sure that you're following exactly as what you described in your plan. A real important part of the process is really understanding the quality of the product before you go through reconditioning. So if you are going to be using sorting technologies to remove serious damage to lower the level of aflatoxin, FDA will understand that correlation between insect damage and aflatoxin. It's in the information that I just mentioned previously that you can copy from our guide. But you need to describe in detail what your quality is before and after processing, and then how many of those defects that you're removing. The last part of the plan is really going to involve that compliance verification part of the process. So you're going to have to identify how you're going to check the product for aflatoxin after you've run it through the reconditioning method that you've chosen. So you're going to have to describe how much of a sample you're going to pull, and typically we'd recommend that you follow our pre-export check protocol for sampling, which would be 22 incremental samples taken from throughout the lot. You can reference that protocol, but be very specific as to who's doing it and how you're actually measuring to make sure that you're pulling those incremental samples. And then the important part of this is what you want to do is, the laboratory testing part, you need to make sure you're describing the chain of custody as well, how that product is getting delivered to the lab and how the lab is doing the testing. With the laboratory part, now this is something we'll talk a little bit more about, but it's a very tedious process for the labs to generate a packet that passes FDA scrutiny. They have to describe all the analytical procedures that they're following, the personnel that are doing the work, and it becomes a very lengthy packet of information that the lab will have to put together for FDA review. The good news is that there's an MOU that's underway between USDA and FDA that we've helped to develop to really leverage the processes that are already in place for these USDA-approved labs that are doing the aflatoxin testing. I spoke with the USDA representative 2 days ago, and he assured me that it's moving through the process. The MOU is in FDA's hands. There's some additional clarification that FDA asked USDA for that they provided, but we're hopeful that this is going to be approved soon, which would alleviate a lot of the burden from the laboratories to put together a lengthy analytical packet. So stay tuned on that. We're hopeful that that's going to be a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel here coming up. I think the take-home message on this, though, is when you're working with the lab on the testing part, make sure you ask them, are you familiar with the goods return process? Have you done this before? Sorry, I got a little bug in my throat. I don't know what's happening here. I think I must be allergic to audiences. I don't know. All right. Now, once you do all that work, you develop this plan, you have to submit it back to your compliance officer. Again, if you have any questions along the way, reach out to your compliance officer and ask them, would this be sufficient? Get it in writing from them. If you feel more comfortable, have a call with them and then follow up with email. If they come back and say, yeah, this sounds good, well, put that in your plan that, this is what we agreed to. It makes it harder for them to reject it down the road because, like I said, you only get 2 chances to submit a plan. If you submit it the first time and they reject it, they will give you one more chance to submit it. If you submit it the second time and they reject it again, that's it. They're not going to allow you to submit a third plan. At that point, you really only have one option. That's to send the product to another market. Well, you have 2 options. You send it back to another export market or you destroy the product. Neither one of those are really good options. So make sure you get your plan correct. When they come back to you, they will come back and check this little box here on the Form 766 that says the plan has been approved. Sometimes they'll put in additional conditions, but typically they approve the plan if it's well written. Once approved, they're going to specify the time in which you have to recondition that product. It's very important that you meet the time frame that's specified that FDA gives you. If you can't meet that time frame, you need to respond back to them immediately with a reason why and get in writing from them an extension to that deadline for carrying out the reconditioning. Very important that you carry out the reconditioning, again, exactly as you described in your reconditioning plan. The rejects that you pull out, if you're going to use sorting to recondition the product, don't destroy those. Pull them out, segregate those, and set those aside. You're going to have to respond back to FDA when you've completed the reconditioning. When you have the lab test results back, you're going to have to submit to them a response back that you've done it all, you've tested the product, you've segregated those rejects that you've pulled out. In some cases, FDA may want to come out to your facility to verify destruction of those rejects outside of the accepted user program. They can't be used for accepted user disposal. They want to see them destroyed. If you destroy them before FDA's had a chance to review the results or come out to your facility, they may reject the entire thing, and then you're out of luck at that point. So again, don't do anything until the FDA signed off at the very end that they've approved the actual reconditioning. And you do that by completing the backside of the Form 766. Once you do conduct your reconditioning and that testing, you'll fill out that form, send it back to your compliance officer, and then you'll wait for notification from them that everything is approved and the product can be released. So I mentioned this MOU between FDA and USDA. Again, the intent is to streamline the whole goods return process and really to leverage the system that we have in place for testing aflatoxin already. We're awaiting final approval on this. Like I said, I spoke with the USDA representative that's responsible for moving this forward with FDA. Looks like it's moving forward. Government shutdown slowed things down a little bit. The new administration this past year has slowed things down. We would have liked to have had this in place. I think we were talking to you about this last year at this time. But it's going to take a little bit longer, but we're hopeful here. I don't want to commit to anything, but I'm hopeful within the next 3 to 4 months we should have this in place. And then finally, I think avoiding shipment rejection by familiarizing yourselves with import country requirements is key. If we can avoid bringing the product back, that's going to be the best thing altogether. We know that's not always going to happen, so there are resources to help you if the product does have to come back to get through that FDA process relatively quickly. Employee training to build familiarity with the different markets is important. We have staff resources. Abby can help too if you have folks that want to know about different markets and some of the regulations. We can help to avoid some of the pitfalls. And then if a rejection does occur, use the template that we've created and the guideline we've created. It's worked in the past. I'm not saying your plan will get approved the first time, but it's more likely that it will than if you submit something on your own. We know it's worked in the past, so we think it's a good tool for you all to use here moving forward as well.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. I can't stress enough how important it is the work that the ABC is doing for helping processors such as myself exporting. The PEC program is crucial to our industry, and I think the institution of the PEC program now in Japan is a huge, huge boost to our industry. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everybody.